meeting of the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries Commission to order. Commissioner Hogan, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag,
The United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Miss Susan, roll call, please. Here.
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 Here. Thank you. Do I hear a motion to adopt the February 3rd commission meeting minutes? Commissioner Blanchard moves the adoption of the amendments. Commissioner Sinceri seconds. Any objection to the adoption of the amendments? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The minutes are adopted. Approval of the March 3rd, 22 agenda. Do I hear a motion to adopt? To approve? Commissioner DeQueer, seconded by Commissioner Blanchard. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Thank you. Okay, commission special announcements, personal privilege. Anyone? All right, thank you. We're going to skip over item number 7 for a moment. The secretary will let us know when those folks are live. They were running just a little bit late. Major Skinner, I saw you just a moment ago. Major Skinner, we skipped over 7, so you're are you giving the enforcement report?
I am, sir.
Okay, sir.
Commissioners here, if you'd like to do that. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. That'll be fine. Yes, sir. We'll go ahead and take that up then.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. We're having a little powwow back there. Excuse us. Thank you all for having us this morning. I am Richard Fisher, Executive Director of the Louisiana Charter Boat Association. LCBA, as we are known, is proud to establish the Tophiel Bourgeois Memorial Award that we will present annually to the law enforcement agent that best exemplifies the mission of wildlife and fisheries, specifically pertaining to the promotion of professionalism within the Louisiana Charter for Hire industry. The award is named after the late legendary charter captain Tophiel Bourgeois. Captain Bourgeois built Bourgeois charters into one of the greatest operations in the state of Louisiana out of Barataria. He was quite a character, as a lot of y'all know. He was one of the most sought after TV and digital media personalities, and he truly possessed the rare quality of being able to put customers on the fish while also being able to make them laugh with his charm and wit. He could be serious too. He got a lot of policy victories for the charter sector as well, and was a dedicated board member of the Louisiana Charter Boat Association, always staunchly advocating for the utmost professionalism in the industry. Sadly, Captain Bourgeois passed away in August of 2019 in a seaplane crash. Captain Bourgeois's customers on the day credited him with giving his life to save theirs after the fact. And as saddening as it is to remember the death of our friend and colleague, we in the Louisiana charter sector can think of no better individual from our world who exemplified the oath to put others above self that enforcement agents live with in their world on a daily basis. So out of this great heartbreak, we're honored to present the first annual Tophiel Bourgeois Memorial Award to Sergeant Joshua Laviolette. Colonel Chad Hebert says that Sergeant Laviolette is a dedicated and thorough enforcement agent who is firm but fair with a tenacious work ethic, and the numbers sure back this up. Since 2018, Sergeant Laviolette has led LWF enforcement in charter guide regulation citations, citing subjects on 12 separate occasions in multiple parishes. Several of these citations involved illegal, unlicensed charter operations. So led by Colonel Hebert's leadership and Sergeant Laviolette's commitment, LDWF has done a tremendous job in rooting out many of these individuals, and we look forward to recognizing LDWF enforcement's continued success on that front. So in appreciation of his remarkable selfless service, additionally, LCBA has also made a $1,000 contribution to Cure SMA in Sergeant Laviolette's honor. Cure SMA is dedicated to the wonderful cause of providing funds, research, and care for individuals with spinal muscular atrophy. So thank you, Sergeant Laviolette. The Louisiana Charter Boat Association is honored and privileged to present you with the inaugural Tophiel Bourgeois Memorial Award.
Sergeant Lovelett, we all join in congratulating you and keep up the good work. Major Skinner, now, if you're ready for the enforcement report, sir.
I am. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, and we apologize for our tardiness. If y'all have a couple of days, I'll tell you the rest of the story about Josh. Well, another time then, right? As usual, we have the enforcement report, and we have a couple of cases that we highlighted. Those news releases are in your packages. For the month of February, we had 2 boating incidents, 1 injury and 1 fatality, 422 written citations, 146 written warnings, and 17 public assists. Enforcement agents cited 2 subjects for taking over the limit of rabbits in Orleans Parish. Agents received a complaint about subjects hunting behind a car dealership in New Orleans East and responded to the area with the assistance of the New Orleans Police Department. Upon arrival, agents discovered 2 pickup trucks, each containing several dead rabbits. The agents set up surveillance and found 8 additional rabbits and observed the subjects actively hunting and killing more rabbits. After making contact, agents discovered the subjects were in possession of 24 rabbits. Agents seized the rabbits and donated them to a local charity. 2 Alexandria men were cited for hunting from a moving vehicle, hunting from a public roadway, and hunting deer during illegal hours. One of the subjects was additionally cited for hunting deer with an illegal electronic sight. Agents received information about night hunting near Latana. Upon arrival, agents made contact with the subjects who were hunting from their vehicle when they shot an antlerless deer. The deer was found in a field nearby. Agents returned during daylight hours and located a second antlerless deer that was also killed. Agents seized a .223 caliber rifle along with an attached electronic sight that was used to harvest the deer. The men faced civil restitution totaling $3,249 for the replacement value of the illegally killed deer. After an extensive investigation, a Harvey resident was cited for gross littering in St. Charles Parish. Enforcement agents received information regarding an illegally discarded load of storm debris off a CC Road near the Bonacary Spillway. After further investigation, agents determined the load originated from the St. John Parish Public Works dumpster yard. Public Works personnel assisted agents with obtaining logbook information and surveillance footage. Using the provided surveillance footage, agents were able to identify the contracted disposal company and the driver of the waste vehicle. Agents interviewed the driver, who admitted to dumping the entire roll-off bin from a disposal truck on CC Road. In addition to the criminal fines and possible incarceration, the subject faces 16 hours of community service in a litter abatement program. And this concludes the report, sir.
Thank you.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I just want
Commissioner
to ask
Sincero.
Major Skinner, question, what kind of gun were they using in Orleans Parish on those rifles?
Shotgun, sir.
Shot. Thank you.
Any other questions, comment? Major, thank you again. Next item is to receive and consider a resolution to incorporate new acquisition into Joyce Wildlife Management Area. Mr. Landry. We got,
He was here.
we'll skip over that then, while we try to locate Mr. Landry. Receive public comments and consider amendments for the notice of intent for the game and fish rules and regulations. Mr. Tooman.
Good morning. I am delighted to be here today to go over a summary of the public comment that we've received for the conditionally approved hunting season notice of intent. Let's see if we can get through here. All right, so what we're going to talk about is the period of January the 6th through, actually this morning, but the last comment I've received was last night. So January 6th to March the 2nd. There have been 44 comments related to the proposed changes. All those comments have been through email, and then 9 general comments or general hunting season comments that actually probably should be 10. So last night we held a public comment Zoom meeting. There were 33 unique registrants and 7 persons attended. About 25 LWF personnel also was on that Zoom meeting. And we received no public comment. We had the chat line open and we had email open. We did receive some public comment from a gentleman that had already made the same comments that's in your packet previously through email. So I did not double count them. And then I did receive an email from a gentleman after the meeting that I called him, as we have a good relationship, and he was actually confused at what he was looking at. So his comments were not necessarily comments. They were questions that he was just misreading the notice of intent. So since we last met commission meeting, these are the comments I've received, 11 comments that you see there. The West Zone waterfowl season, they mostly revolve around the dates. And as I said last year at this time, I think one person wanted an earlier season and 2 people wanted a later season, but the West Zone is certainly split between whether they want an earlier start or a season that runs later into the framework. And then general comments that we've received, air rifles, chronic wasting disease, turkey, waterfowl, and animal restrictions. You have copies of all these emails that Ms. Susan provided in your packet. So I just summarize them and put them in this form for you. And then total public comments related to pros notice of intent, 48. I need to update that first slide, but there's been 48 total comments that we received since we started collecting this public comment. And then we've had 10 general public comments since the beginning of this public comment period. And with that, I will take any questions.
Questions, comments?
So one more thing, last month you approved, conditionally approved 2 amendments to go to the notice of intent. One was on Grassy Lake, WMA, and the other one was the language about Pomme de Terre, excuse me. Miss Susan keeps them in line as always. Pomme de Terre, WMA deer season, and we also had some language in there about Soda Lake, some access restrictions that I went over about how we've actually added properties to Soda Lake, so that's not needed anymore. We will hold an administrative public hearing April 21st, 2022 in this room. If anybody would like to show up and comment, they can also email me their comments on those potpourri amendments, but certainly they can come to this public meeting. And with that, that's all I have.
Mr. Reynolds.
Around my part of the woods up there in North Louisiana, and I see you only had like 2 maybe comments on baiting deer.
Yes, sir.
So my question is, how many states allow that? Do you have that information offhand?
That's going to be a question for Jonathan better than me. Would you like to address that, Jonathan?
Why don't we, Commissioner Reynolds, they're going to be given a report on
Okay,
the
okay.
CWD.
I was just curious.
Okay.
So maybe we could get Jonathan.
That'd be great. It is a hot topic in our area up there.
Okay, I didn't cover this, but public comment for the notice of intent will be accepted through tomorrow. That was my mistake. It probably should have been through today, but it'll go through tomorrow. Based on the amount of public comment that we've received so far, I doubt that I'll receive anything else, but we will, if somebody wants to submit public comment on the notice of intent, we will accept it through tomorrow, and I'll provide that to you if I get something in that time frame. So thank you for your time.
Okay.
Anything else? Thank you, Mr. Coon.
Thank you.
If I might, just so everyone's clear on the protocols, I know we've got a couple of new commissioners up here. For season 7 protocols, this is the last meeting that we can accept conditionally adopted changes to the notice of intent. April, we will not be doing any amendments or proposed amendments. And then May, y'all will take an up or down vote on the amendments that have been made through January, February, and March. So I don't hear any people asking for action here, but I just want to make sure we all know this is the last bite at the apple for amendments before we start accepting conditionally adopted amendments in May.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Secretary Monisset, apologize for stepping away from the podium for a second. Good morning. My name is Alvin Landry. I'm an attorney for the department. Today, I'm offering a resolution for your consideration that's going to be adding 80 acres to Joyce WMA. Just this past December, the department purchased fee simple 80 acres of marshland wetlands for addition into Joyce WMA. This acquisition is located in Tangipahoa Parish. You can see right there on the side, adjacent to one of our tracks near Highway 51. It gets the black shaded in the area, small, but we surround it on 3 sides. This resolution is going to dedicate this 80 acres for the protection of wildlife and conservation and management of this habitat. Also provide 80 acres for public recreation. Any water bottoms that are state-owned will also be incorporated. This is a larger view of Joyce now, which is going to be, after this, over 41,800 acres. And it'll be on the kind of the left side divided by the highway. And all of this is located north of Lake Maurepas, kind of the northwest of Lake Pontchartrain. And I ask that you consider and approve this proposed resolution.
Questions, comments? Commissioner
Make a
Sinclair?
motion to,
Commissioner Sinclair moves the adoption of the resolution. Commissioner Hogan seconds that. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That resolution is adopted. Thank you, Mr. Landry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission.
Okay, and now we'll have Mr. Borlon giving us an update on the
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Jonathan Bardlaw. I work as Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Deer Program Manager. And today I'm going to provide a brief update on CWD as well as a timetable for some activities that'll unfold over the course of the summer. So sampling updates and guidelines, Dr. LaCour last month presented not only sampling updates for the state, but for this particular region. It's the area in which we had detected CWD. In this case, we're looking at Franklin, Madison, and Tensas. These are the 3 parishes that were identified in the declaration of emergency, and we're referring to these as our control area. Since the last presentation, the numbers have changed by 30. So in your packets, the map that you have was actually provided a week ago. And those numbers actually reflected the number of results that we had received up to a week ago. Now in your packets, we have additional results. Matter of fact, we're at 218 samples for these 3 parishes for the season. There are still 4 results pending. So the last 4 samples submitted have not been resulted, but we expect those any day. So once we have those last 4 results, then that'll be a wrap for the current season. Again, that's not all of the sampling that will transpire. We will still take advantage of road kills. Any sick or neurologic deer that's reported to our agency will respond to those. In addition, we do issue a few crop depredation permits, in particular in this part of the state. While those permits do not result in many deer being harvested, we will specify in the permit that they are required to provide us a sample of any deer harvested by use of that permit. So there'll be an opportunity to pick up some additional samples in the months to come. Meetings and discussions with staff, that refers to subject matter experts in our neighboring states as well as across the country. So again, we're the 29th state to detect this disease. So we're trying to learn what we can from folks that have been managing the disease for a few years and a few decades for that matter. In addition to that, we're putting together a plan that will address mitigation measures within this control area. And with that, we sought some input from Colonel Abear's folks with help with language that would provide some consistency with language we already have in regulation. In addition to that, we've talked with our staff in regards to logistics about how to deliver some things on the landscape, utilizing their familiarity with those parishes. But the significance of the CWD control area, the control area in this case is just a term that's used at the federal level. So with the USDA, with wildlife disease investigations, a control area is basically your infectious zone, so the area of known infection and the immediate buffer zone around it. So the buffer zone and infectious zone basically makes up your control area. And the control area in this case isn't necessarily where you're controlling the disease as much as where you're placing mitigation measures. So in this case, we identified the parishes, Franklin, Madison, and Tensas, due to their proximity to that known positive as our control area. So the language we're using here is just meant to be consistent with what's being used at a federal level and other states. The surveillance zone in this case would be the area outside of the control area where you would not have any mitigation measures in place. You would simply just have a heightened level of sampling and surveillance. Implemented an incident action plan. That's really an internal document. In this case, the incident is the detection of CWD in Tensas Parish. So this defines roles and responsibilities for staff that's assigned to working in those parishes and sampling CWD. We do plan on coming back to y'all next month with a notice of intent. So it'll be presented at the April 7th meeting. The parishes that we have identified are the same that are in the DE now. It's Franklin, Madison, and Tensas. As you likely anticipate, a couple of the mitigation strategies that are in the declaration of emergency will also be recommended in the notice of intent that'll be presented next month, and that'll focus around baiting and carcass exportation. The question earlier about baiting, and I can address now since we're talking about potential mitigation measures that we'll propose. Baiting is obviously widely practiced across the whitetails range. All of our neighboring states bait. And in the Southeast, the only state I'm aware of that does not allow the use of bait is Tennessee. Of course, there are other states in the Midwest and Northeast that prohibit the use of bait. I'm just not sure of the exact number. But when you're talking about, our immediate neighbors in the Southeast, just about everyone does. But there are exceptions within states. As you would expect, states with CWD, many of those do have prohibitions on baiting.
Well,
Yes, sir.
the reason I asked was because on comments from around the house and on Facebook and everything, when it came out that we had a positive, that it just blew up. I had like 1,000 comments on my page that I read, and I mean, it was really hotly contested. For the most part, they did not want to see the baiting go away, and they were afraid that we would pass a notice of intent here to do away with baiting for the whole state. And so I made a statement that as far as my understanding was, currently it would only be those parishes that have that that positive in the area. So that was just my question.
Yes, sir.
Just something I can take back home.
Sure, Commissioner Reynolds, and that is what is proposed at this time, would be to address, we're looking to mitigate within those three parishes due to their proximity to that known positive. The only thing I can add to that, we actually, through our mail survey, just a couple of years ago, asked a question about whether hunters who identify themselves as deer hunters, whether or not they actually utilize bait. And then we had a follow-up question asking them how much bait did they use. So they had to pick some, there were some parameters set up for them to select the amount. And roughly it was close to 50%, but just under 50% of Louisiana deer hunters actually utilize bait. So it's definitely something that's widely practiced and strongly supported by many. There's going to be some public opportunity for comment, especially after the April 7th meeting specific to the notice of intent. But there's already some meetings that are planned and have already begun. These are community meetings, meetings that aren't even necessarily within the CWD control area, but meetings with sportsmen's groups and community groups across the state. So that is important. But the meetings here that we have planned, there is an opportunity to hold public meetings in both Franklin and Tensall parishes. We're going to utilize the LSU Ag Center. They've graciously opened their doors to us for those meetings, and that is the plan as of now. Those dates and times will be announced once the notice of intent is conditionally adopted. Surveillance strategy and access to testing. Those are things that we're working on this summer. So it's making sure that hunters hunting, not just across the state, but within the management zone can easily have their deer tested. So we're looking at some things that our neighbors are already doing to help facilitate access to testing. And we'll talk more about those in meetings to come. With an April 7th, notice of intent, without any delays and approval through the oversight process, the proposed rule could go in effect April 20th in the state register. So that's more or less our timeline that we're looking at as it pertains to the rule of the notice. And continued education and outreach. So we're, again, as I mentioned earlier, we're communicating with our neighboring states. There's also some new resource aids being developed. We're not doing those independently. They're actually being carried out by Mississippi State University. It's going to provide scripts and animations. It's short 1.5 to 2-minute presentations that folks will be able to watch on multiple platforms. They'll be able to access those through our website. Those messages are very specific about different aspects of the disease, maybe something as basic as what is CWD and how is it transmitted, the importance of restricting baiting where CWD is found. That's just a couple of the examples, but they're very short and targeted and use some high-end animation. So we're pretty excited about that. In addition to that, education and outreach, we're going to utilize our traditional platforms for disseminating information, but also recognize that, one of our greater challenges moving forward, especially being the 29th state, is there are a lot of folks out there who have access to information about chronic wasting disease. And in the online age, folks are going to do a lot of investigation on their own. So that, the bigger challenge will just be to, remain transparent, try to influence behavior in a positive direction where we can, and obviously recognizing that is to be the challenge at hand. But with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions, comments? At least plenty of time for me.
Yes, sir.
The NOI basically replaced the current emergency declaration. That's the first thing.
Yes, sir. And we're looking at, what are some other things we could do? And we have discussed and considered those. But at this time, that's going to be the base of that notice of intent. We looked at some things such as other states have often done. And even in our plan, You talk about something as basic as liberalizing, seasons and limits. And, it's certainly something we would consider. But then when we start looking at, well, what is actually happening in those particular parishes? What percentage of hunters are actually harvesting 5 or 6 deer? And the answer of successful hunters, it's right around 1%. So about 1% are actually reaching a harvest of 5 or 6 deer with a 6 deer limit. And then there's a lot of DMAP participation in those 3 parishes, and actually looked at the number of tags issued versus what is actually utilized. So they're roughly utilizing about 40% of the tags that we issue. So, we talked about what, is there some benefit of expanding limits? And what we have identified is many of those things would somewhat be symbolic. It is something we want to encourage people to do, but at this point, it doesn't necessarily appear that our limits nor our tag allotments in the case of DMAP are providing any type of harvest constraint. Our biggest challenge will be just convincing hunters the need for harvesting deer, to continue to hunt and harvest deer, the importance of having lower deer populations, not higher deer populations. And we looked at this stuff and talked about it with subject matter experts in other states who liberalized when limits and season length wasn't necessarily a constraint. And what happened in those particular cases is that liberalization did not lead to increased harvest, but it raised another divisive issue where folks were pushing back against expanded limits, and their perception was that all of the deer would be killed. And, it just creates these additional challenges. So again, here it's really identifying what can we do to, influence behavior, utilizing what we currently have. How can we sell the importance of continuing to hunt and harvest deer in those areas, why it's important not to bait. Certainly, we do have to have some regulations, but at the same time, those regulations need to allow us to arrive at what the intent is in this particular case. And certainly, but that's just an example. And there are a couple of others on the table, but to answer your question, it's basically going to be a carcass exportation restriction along with a baiting prohibition.
Commissioner Hogan and I had looked at the donations of the Hunters for the Hungry program, and that area of the state has the best success with that program. And that might be a tool is just to encourage, even if they don't want to kill a deer to put in their freezer, or they're concerned about CWD, which would potentially mean less harvest of deer.
Yes, sir.
Then you may encourage that. And part of that would be identifying those processors, make sure that we have the testing in place for deer that are donated. We'd get more tests that way if we could get the processing plants in the area to know how to collect the samples or turn the samples in the heads or whatever way we're going to do it. And might we keep our harvest up or even achieve a greater harvest in that area and benefit that program at the same time, just a suggestion.
Yes, sir. That's a great suggestion.
Along with that, one of the things, don't forget if I had mentioned this to Dr. McClure or yourself, but one of the things I'd like to see, that's a kind of a trophy deer area of the state also. Hunters, I think this is a correct statement, typically do not know how to cape a deer to be able to get that skull mount that they can take off. Hunters, when they kill a trophy deer that they want to mount, they cut that, they cape it down to the neck and they cut it off. Well, under the rules you're proposing, it would be illegal to take that cape and head out together. And I don't know if any other states figured this out. Maybe it's not practical to figure it out, but I think you're going to be making outlaws out of some people that stick that in a plastic bag and take it to their taxidermist back home. I don't know how many taxidermists are in that area. I'm sure there's quite a few. I know with the importation ban on the Texas side of the Sabine River, you had people advertise that you could drop your Texas deer off to be mounted because you couldn't bring it back into Louisiana. But that's a real factor that I don't know how people are, unless there's enough taxidermists that are people willing to lose, I don't think that you're gonna teach them to cape that deer for mounting. And even then, they couldn't bring the cape out legally, could they?
They would be able to bring the cape
I
once
thought
it,
it was a process cape.
right, the cape once it had been removed from the carcass of the animal.
So in the term processed in there?
No, it wouldn't have to be processed, but it would have to be removed
Maybe I
from
was
the
wrong. I
animal.
just thought I
Yes, sir.
remembered seeing that it was a process case. But see if there's something, some science that would say that if you were going to taxidermist, that you could put it in a double bag, you know, and then the taxidermist would have to, I assume that's gonna be part of our deal anyway, is
Right.
try to continue to encourage them to do samples and to properly dispose, because they get a lot of that
Yes, sir.
that stuff they gotta dispose of.
Yes, sir.
Just my
Well,
thoughts.
well, yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll take those into consideration.
In these meetings that you've had, has agriculture and forestry participated in any of those meetings?
No, sir.
Have
Not
they
at this point.
been invited to participate?
I have not. The meetings that I've participated in and the meetings that I'll participate in the upcoming month or more or less community invites.
I understand that's
Yes,
dealing,
sir.
but I'm talking about dealing with the other states that have experience in learning what their best practices are to try to affect control and all. But we've talked about this numerous times. It still hadn't been done yet. But agriculture and forestry with the domestic population plays an extremely important role that needs to be integrated into this. So I'm going to ask that when y'all have these strategy meetings, that they get an invite. And I know Mr. Myers has got that meeting set up with the commissioner at this point. I just hadn't received my invite yet, but Secretary Montesey's probably gotten his. I'll just hint that little bit, okay?
Yes, sir.
I think this is probably a question for Dr. McCool, but you may know the answer. Have we got the DNA test back? Because this goes back to agriculture and forestry. Was that a resident deer or was it a deer that came from somewhere else?
Dr. LaCour will be able to expand, but that sample has been submitted to Dr. Randy DeYoung at Texas A&M. But to my knowledge, we haven't got those results back. We anticipate it taking a little bit longer.
Yeah, we have not gotten it back. He indicated it would be middle, maybe the end of March before we got the results. But the sample is in his lab.
Okay, please let us know when you get that if you would. All right. I believe that's it. Anybody else come up with a question? The only other thing I said, when you ask your question about who baits, it probably should have been, do you hunt on a WMA or do you hunt on private lands? Because I don't know what percentage of our hunters hunt WMAs, but they wouldn't be allowed to bait. So they would have to check off. No, they did not bait.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Okay, receive an update on the 21 waterfowl season. Jason Olsack.
Good morning, Jason Olzak, Waterfowl Program Manager. So I was asked to give an update on waterfowl, this past waterfowl season 2021-22. And I'll do that with the information we have to this date. So I'll first start off by what we knew coming into this season. The traditional waterfowl breeding population habitat survey that's been done since 1955 and has been used to inform harvest management has not been completed in the last 2 years because of COVID restrictions. This included estimates of birds and wetlands. Since 2016, it has not been the current year's populations and wetland numbers that have influenced fall hunting regulations, but the data from the previous spring. So this past 2021-22 season was set using information from the spring survey of 2020, which did not take place. And while we're talking about that, the survey for 2021 this past year did not take place either. So the last total duck population estimate that we had was in 2019, which resulted in a total breeding population of 39 million. That's 10% higher than the long-term average, which is down that that 2019 number. That's down from the high in 2015 of 49 million total breeding ducks. And the mallard breeding population for 2019 as well was 9.4 million. As stated, the number of Canadian prairie wetlands also plays a factor in duck production and expected fall flight. Last year we had data on those was 2019, 2.9 million Canadian ponds estimated. So without surveys, predictions had to be made using, amongst other things, both long-term history and precipitation models to forecast the number of Canadian ponds for the last 2 years. And these models predicted with a very high degree of uncertainty the 2020 spring Canadian ponds at 3.4 million with a range of 1.75 to 5.06 million, and a 2020 mid-continent mallard population of 9.07 million, standard error there of 1.43. The 2021 spring estimate for Canadian ponds was 2.9 million, ranged from 1.14 to 4.73 million. And 2021 mid-continent mallards estimated 8.62 million, standard error also 1.43. Though we do not have May waterfowl breeding population habitat survey numbers to confirm, we did know from weather data this past spring, there was widespread drought throughout the southern Canadian and US prairie states, both important habitats for breeding ducks. I'll also add that select surveys were completed in this past spring, 2021. Alaska did theirs. But that's western mallard stock, so that influences Pacific flyway, but also some surveys that would pertain to the Mississippi flyway that were done this past year were Wisconsin and North Dakota. Wisconsin did not do theirs in 2020 because of COVID. However, North Dakota's has been continuous since 1948. So North Dakota, the 2020, well, in the chart we're looking at here, the gray bars indicate the water index, and the blue, the total ducks, all ducks index for North Dakota. We see the 2020 survey showed North Dakota at the 6th wettest year, and 2021 as the 5th driest year on record. The 2021 Maywater index was down 80% from 2020 and 68% below their long-term average. Comparatively low in 2008, 1993, and 1990, which was the all-time low, and years from the late 80s. Mallard numbers from this past year in North Dakota were down 48%. That's the lowest since 93. Pintails showed a 66% decline, widgeon down 49%, green wings down 50%, blue wings down 10%, and gadwall down 47%. So with those grim environmental conditions and little survey data, our expectations were lowered and then lowered a little more as hunting season approached. Outlook was that far fewer ducks would be migrating south, and low breeding success, we'd be relying on fall flock heavy with adult birds. And then Hurricane Ida did some pretty good damage to southeastern coastal marshes, Terrebonne and Barataria basins, severely affected habitat, but we did have water. Hopes were raised with the September 10th teal survey, which showed an increase of 19% from 2020 in blue-winged teal. That's the highest in the last 4 years, 57% above the nearest 5-year average and 70% above the most recent 10-year average. We'll look at the numbers first from the annual monthly winter waterfowl surveys that we do on the coast in Catahoula Lake. January is typically the peak of duck abundance in Louisiana. This year's survey showed slight increases as the season progressed. From November to December, we increased 8%, and then from December to January, duck abundance increased 43%. But recent trends are negative, and we observed a record low count in December. That's the lowest December count we've ever had. So we see that long-term duck abundance is highly variable, but recent monthly trends show us a few things. Monthly surveys from the last 2 decades show a negative trend for November. Recall November 2021, our survey was 1.3 million. That's up from last year's record low. So the all-time low for November, the all-time low estimate took place last year. That was 855,000. So this year we're down from the most recent 5-year estimate by 13%, down 23% from the most recent 10-year average, and 34% below the long-term average for November. December, again, this year, 1.4 million. This was an 8% increase from November, but also recall a record low. That's down from the most recent 5 years by 48% and 46% below the most recent 10-year average, and 45% below the long-term average for December. January estimate, 2.1 million, up 4% from last January. It's 9% below the most recent 5 years, 16% below the most recent 10-year, and 29% below the long-term average total ducks in January. Now we'll look at trends in individual species counts for the January. This is the January coastal survey from here on out with the species. They've been declining for most species, especially in the short term, defining that last 2 decades. The January 2022 mallard estimate was the lowest ever at 23,000. That's 93% lower than the long-term average, which is 310,000. Gadwall estimates for January 2022 were also the lowest ever at 341,000. That's 58% below their long-term average. 97,000 pintails is not an all-time low, but the 7th lowest on record and 68% below the long-term average. Green winged teal at 268,000. That's 51% below long-term average. Mottled duck, another one lowest on record at 23,000 estimate on the coast. That's 32% below the most recent 5-year average, 45% below the most recent 10-year average, and 62% below the long-term. Spoonbills, long-term trend is positive and highly variable on an annual basis. Our 2022 estimate of 139,000 was down from the previous year's estimate of 323,000 and 28% below the long-term average. So that's it for the bad news. On the positive side, blue-winged teal and divers are increasing. In the January blue wing estimate jumped from 90,000 in 2021 to the second highest ever count at 231,000. That's 161% above the most recent 5-year average, 209% above the most recent 10-year average, and 132% above the long-term. Scaup are up from last year's count of 157,000 to 381,000 here in 2022. This was the highest count since 1989 for scaup. It's 90% above their long-term average. Ringneck duck also increasing trend. Our last estimate there in January was 394,000, down slightly from last year's 431,000, 107% above the long-term trend for ringnecks. Canvasbacks at 157,000 was up from 101,000 of the previous year, also 89% above long-term average canvasbacks. So one of the questions being pondered in the last few years is, are Louisiana's low waterfowl numbers an artifact of low continental populations, which in the last few years we're not sure of, or smaller proportions that are migrating to Louisiana. So an increase in distribution, wintering distribution of ducks. So first we'll look at some Mississippi flyway, look at the flyway as a whole, and then later discuss a few of many possible factors that are affecting this, including amongst others, current climate and habitat issues. Midwinter survey that takes place in January, simultaneous survey conducted by nearly all states in the Mississippi Flyway. Surprisingly, Flyway wide, this year's duck numbers were only down 2% from the 2021 Midwinter survey. For the last 4 years, the total count has been consistent and down from a recent streak of high estimates by about 2 million. One consideration here is a few states had incomplete surveys in January of 2021. So not this past midwinter, but the winter before, those were Alabama, all COVID related. Alabama, Illinois, and Tennessee did not complete their surveys last year. And the proportion of all Mississippi flyway ducks wintering in Louisiana has decreased 33%. Looking at mallards, which because of their large population drive the continental population estimates and harvest regulations. This midwinter survey pattern repeats when looking at the entire flyway. Incremental 5-year flyway averages have hovered between 2 and 3 million mallards. However, the percentage of all mallards in the Mississippi flyway that are wintering in Louisiana has been clearly and consistently falling. Moving on to geese, both the total number and percentage of light geese being snow and Ross geese, that winter in Louisiana is continuously declining as well. Before 2000, half the flyway's light geese could be found in Louisiana. For the last 2 years, this number is under 20%. All the while, light goose numbers in the flyway have increased at an average of 3% per year since 2000. The situation with white-fronted geese is even more stark. White-front estimates in the entire Mississippi flyway have increased at an average of 12% per year since 2001. And the proportion of those birds estimated in Louisiana in January has dropped from 80% to under 20% and continues to decline. Let's take a look at some climatic factors for this past year and how it probably played a role in duck abundance in Louisiana. We'll look at the Palmer Drought Index, the Z index here, which measures short-term drought. Beginning in September, we can see that the persistent drought on the northern plains, but a very wet summer and hurricane left Louisiana in good shape as teal season began on September 11th. Through October, things were quite different. The central U.S. had changed a lot. Rain events occurred up north, but Louisiana got only a few inches of precipitation, and we were at average moisture. And the average temperature statewide was 3 to 6 degrees warmer than average. In fact, only 4 times in the last 127 did we have a warmer October. Lack of rain persisted through November, and all of Louisiana was in drought for the commencement of our duck season. The east zone was in severe drought, with the west zone in moderate drought. Temperatures in Louisiana were normal, but slightly warmer than normal in the northern and mid-plain states. Then it got worse in December. We saw extreme drought through much of the traditional southern wintering states along the Gulf Coast, and temperatures more than 10 degrees above normal through south central and mid-latitude states, extending up much of the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys, and recall temps in the 80s here in Louisiana between Christmas and New Year's. Rain finally came in January, but very little, and finally some cold weather there in January as well. So throughout our waterfowl season, we suffered warmer than average temperatures and a lack of wetland habitat outside coastal marshes. Another aspect was the lack of snow and ice cover, extending well north. This animation here will show the daily snow events from the end of December through February. And to really see if that'll play there. Yeah. And really, to really affect migration, snow has to persist on the landscape for more than a few days. and ice has to cover the lakes and rivers. I'll play that again. And as you see, you know, a snow event would last perhaps 2 days, and then it'd be melted off throughout much of those northern states up north of us. We can talk a little as well quickly about recent harvest trends, but not for this past season. We will not have final harvest data compiled for waterfowl hunter surveys and parts collection wings for a few months. But in the last 2 decades, the number of Louisiana waterfowl hunters and number of total days they spent afield has tracked similarly, but recently declined. You see these are, note that these are different scales on each axis for number of hunters and days afield. The average number of days hunted per year for both ducks and geese has changed a little, actually ticked up a little in the year before this past season. And total ducks harvested has also shown the same pattern as hunter numbers and days afield over the recent years. When we've had a lot of hunters, they spend a lot of time in the field and harvest a lot of birds. Recently, though, total duck harvest has declined more than 60%. Age ratios in the harvest, these are the data we get from participants in the parts collection survey or the wing collections. Low numbers generally correspond to years with low productive output, which generally also corresponds to prairie wetland availability. It's not entirely that simple, and states to the north of us always have higher ratios because they get the first crack at the more vulnerable juvenile birds when the season opens. Daily and seasonal success has necessarily declined over time as well for both ducks and geese. All years included here involve a season of 60 days and 6 bird bag. All goose seasons here include light goose bag of 20 and total days of between 107 and 74 birds, and white fronted bag limit of 2 to 3 for all those years on there as well. So comparing duck harvest with other Mississippi flyway states, we see that the Louisiana proportion of total duck harvest has declined significantly in both the short term and long term. And looking at possible longitudinal shifts in harvest, the central flyway duck harvest has fluctuated far less than the Mississippi flyway for the last 2 decades. Also in the last 20 years, you'll note the 3 most recent years of available data we have been the lowest harvest years for the Mississippi flyway. Looking at harvest for both Snow and Ross's geese in Louisiana, we see the same trends in both the total harvest and the distribution of that harvest within the flyway, or the distribution to Louisiana anyway in blue there. The harvest numbers for both Snow and Ross geese have declined at similar rates. Speckled belly harvest trends are no different in the same time frame. We've been harvesting a greater proportion of the flyway population than light geese, but this past year's results, I have a feeling will be considerably lower based on our midwinter estimate of 36,000. Talked a bit about the weather and precipitation for the past season, but one of the other factors in waterfowl abundance is the quality of habitat, which is a major influence on carrying capacity of the land. Many aspects of our ability to attract and hold ducks outside of weather have been deteriorating for some time. You know, this is no news. This is here on the slide. That's just a short list of a much larger habitat issues we have to deal with. By far the biggest is the continuation of coastal marsh loss. Small fresh marsh pools where submerged aquatics and annuals combine with invertebrates to attract ducks has changed. Conversion to open water, often saltier water with no foraging value to ducks, especially dabbling ducks in the interest, especially dabbling ducks. And just to save time, I'll just mention the effects on intact marsh of nuisance aquatic vegetation, fresher marshes, within fresher marshes like Salvinia and hyacinth. The mainstay agricultural habitat in Louisiana, rice, has also declined. Planted rice acreage down 19% in the last 20 years. That's a decline of 100,000 acres. And that's more than twice the size of Sherburne Wildlife Management Area. Additionally, where rice continues to exist, the efficiency of harvest leaves far less foraging potential than once existed. Um, for instance, fields now after harvest, waste grain available for ducks and geese is 75 pounds per acre. Go back to the 70s, that available food, waste rice, was 400 pounds per acre. Also, clean farming practices and such as fall disking, herbicide-heavy methods that have nearly eliminated weeds in fields. Those weeds are what biologists would refer to as moist soil vegetation, highly valuable waterfowl food. So climate ag policy and individual landowner decisions are mostly out of the control of waterfowl managers, but we have used a few tools in the past to affect the quality and quantity of local habitat. This list includes longstanding programs such as North American Wetland Conservation Act, Louisiana Waterfowl Program, and ASEP WRE, which formerly known as WRP, Wetland Reserve Program, to conserve, set aside habitat that influenced waterfowl. Also, more new on that list, the NRCS Working Lands for Wildlife Program, which is a shorebird program. We never thought we'd get to the day where you'd have to incentivize putting water on rice fields during the winter, but that's where we're at. And some of those fields, if shorebirds is the avenue we go to get water on the ground, that benefits ducks as well. As well, improving the management on LWF wildlife management areas, setting back succession, eliminating woody encroachment on those management areas, and maximizing waterfowl foraging capacity in those acres. And then also we're looking into some coastal grasslands programs as well that would benefit breeding mottle ducks. As I mentioned, the lowest January estimate ever on mottle ducks. Every survey we've got for mottle ducks shows a declining trend. And then also the money we continue to send to Canadian breeding habitats in the prairie. So looking ahead to the spring of 2022, droughts are not limited to single year events a lot of times. So worries persist that continued dry conditions could affect the prairie pothole region and waterfowl breeding success again this year. There's still time though. March is typically a period of blizzards, precipitation events on the prairie. So, but that's something we'll be keeping our eye on going forward. And that'll be that. I'll take any questions.
Questions? Commissioner Sincere.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions. I just have a comment. I happen to be listening to radio this past weekend, and they happen to be talking about the ducks and management, how we manage the population. It was more about the issue with how we manage the populations rather than environmental habitat conditions that have affected the duck harvest and population down here in Louisiana. And with that said, I think it could be an opportunity after having listened to that to maybe to reach out to some of these outlets to get on the program and explain to the listeners that it's not just about management practices. A lot of it has to do with our things that are out of the control of us who manage the resources of the state. And that's a comment. And I don't know how to go about doing that. Except for maybe working with the Randy and Patrick to be able to discuss and get on a regular type thing with them so that we can reach out and get the information out that's accurate to the citizens that listen to those channels. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions or comments? I'll follow up on what Commissioner Sincere said, and is what I kind of implored the department to do. We can't expect that information is going to be disseminated by how many people are watching this broadcast of this commission meeting. We've got to go to the sports writers, to the radio hosts that Commissioner Sinceri was listening to, and try to probably actually get on those programs to talk about CWD, to talk about why our duck hunters are frustrated in Louisiana. You know, we get the information, but we don't have the individual ability to disseminate that information. This presentation was requested to some degree in response to a comment that we'd gotten about we need to reduce the duck limit, how many ducks you can kill. I look and it shows that the hunter harvest on a per day success ratio was 2.62 ducks. Well, that's an average. So some zero, some kill their limit.
Yep.
Do you have a thought? And I'm probably putting you on the spot, but would lower the limit do anything? I mean, when you talk about the environmental conditions, it doesn't do much good to preserve ducks to go back to breed, and they don't have the breeding habitat when they get there. But is there any merit in looking at Louisiana with the amount of ducks that we're taking out of the Mississippi flyway if we reduced our limit?
Well, so the frameworks within which we can set our limits as a state are those have been that the data, the breeding data and the pond data has been analyzed, and the appropriate packages that are offered to the states are based on that data already. So that's offered flyway wide to all states of the Mississippi flyway, and they can choose to be more conservative within those limits. In some conversations I've had with colleagues in other states, they certainly are not they're not looking at lowering their limits or number of days hunted.
And I understand that, and you said that correctly, and all states have input into that. But the feds say that if you go with the 6 duck limit, you're not hurting the population, or it's sustainable, or whatever the proper term would be. I would like to see some data, and I should have requested this specifically, I guess. How many hunters kill over 2 ducks on a hunter effort? How many kill over 4, and how many kill 6, just so we could look at that. A number of years ago, I think it was in the 80s, maybe early 90s, but there was a request of the department by the legislature to present a study like this. And the dramatic thing that I retained from that presentation was that the number of ducks that come to Louisiana was directly related to the snow mass. And it was a correlation, and you kind of showed it, not in as dramatic fashion as I believe they did back then, and that's probably in y'all's archive somewhere. But when that snow mass came to southern Arkansas, man, we were having banner season. We were just killing all the ducks.
Sure.
One thing that as a layman, with all of my expertise in duck biology, blue wings migrate. That's why we have an early teal season. And that's why our teal harvest is pretty good in Louisiana. Mallards, I figured out, they don't migrate. They get pushed south. And part of the changes in that is that duck hunting has a value that's different than just a few years ago when I was a kid. Nobody would have grown fields of corn with the price of corn and let it sit there. But now commercial operations, or even big gun private operations, can afford to grow hundreds of acres of corn, flood it, put those machines that didn't exist until a couple of decades ago to keep the water open and all, to have those ducks stay in the north, even when you do get the snow and ice that would have before that moved the mallards and the geese and stuff south, if those are fair statements, incorrect.
Well, the effect of that wide scale is yet to be quantified. Yeah, yes, it happens, but to what extent that is the major driver of migration, it's probably not that great.
The snow mass you're saying?
Oh, the
that's
snow
not
mass, for sure,
quantified?
yeah, you covered a lot of aspects there, but definitely weather. And you look at, we've got the second half of those species graphs that I showed, all those divers and blue wings especially too, those trends increasing here in Louisiana, while the other puddle ducks and especially the big bodied birds that can handle that cold weather, mallards and geese especially, those have continued to stay further north.
Okay. Are you prepared today to tell us, should this commission even be looking at a reduced limit? Would that benefit anything? Is that brought up in y'all's meetings?
No. Looking at reducing the limit, it would be, unfortunately, we don't have that harvest data for this past season here yet, but I would, I hate to make a guess on it, but I bet you we already shot less ducks than we did last year because of that reduction, whether it's in overall population or the population coming to Louisiana. And additionally too, so we're setting this coming season based on what happened in 2021. However, we know also that a bigger factor in next year's fall population is going to be what happens in the coming months on the prairies. Like I kind of mentioned, if we do get some good moisture, good blizzards up there, fill some wetlands, we may end up with a good crop of ducks then heading south in the fall.
Just how far south they go.
Exactly. Yeah.
One of the things, and I'll close with this, is that if I see anecdotally, I see the duck hunters going out there, they enjoy the pursuit so much, and that they go out there and they have bluebird days and they don't shoot a duck, and then they hit that one good day post front, and they kill some duck. I think if you take away that opportunity to kill a 6-bird limit, then you limit them even on the good day. They can't kill as many as they kill any more than they killed on those bad days. I think you're going to have reduced duck hunters out there pursuing the sport, which is always bad for the species.
I'd like to add some of that. If we reduce the number of ducks and days, one thing that would occur is you would have fewer blinds hunted, which means you would have less water on the landscape, which means you're limiting the wintering habitat for the ducks, which is problematic. If we don't have a wet spring, likely 23-24 season will be 3 ducks in 30 days. So it may be coming anyway. I'll tell you a story. December 16th of 17 was the opening day of the second split. And I've hunted the same place since 1995. And we've had some good times and bad times, but that opening weekend, the second split, it snowed all the way down into Arkansas that week. And that weekend, I think we had 14 hunters on Saturday, and we killed 14 limits of ducks. We all killed our mallard limit. Did the same thing on Sunday. The wind shifted out of the south and it warmed up. Monday morning, they were gone for 2 or 3 weeks until we had another front. That's the last time we killed a big bunch of limits at our place. It's because everything's set up weather-wise, and the landscape was covered with snow up the flyway, and it pushed the mallards down. So I don't know where we're headed, but it's likely, once again, 23-24, we'll have 3 ducks in 30 days, and that'll reset the clock.
I have one additional slide here that I anticipated a little bit. Some discussion here was So this would be the adaptive harvest matrix for this past 2021 season. And you see there on the x-axis, the Canadian ponds at 2.9 million and the mid-continent breeding population of mallards at 8.62. So you see, we're well within that, still based on these estimates now, still within that liberal framework of 6 and 60. But recall, so the mallard estimate, the standard error on that was 1.5 million, 1.43 million. So this estimate actually could have been about 7 million, which would have had us in restrictive. So that could have been, if we had real numbers, a more accurate estimate, that could have potentially been where that number occurred. But there, and even with 1 year being liberal when we maybe should have been restrictive, that's not going to crash the duck population, in the long term.
All right. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Spear.
do they know when they will resume the harvesting? I mean, I know the government that with COVID is why they haven't, COVID restrictions, they haven't done it in the last couple of years, but is there any talk of them doing it this year?
Well, it's the Canadian Wildlife Service actually that's
Canadian
the major
Wildlife Service.
obstacle there, and I think they're going to make a decision in April. So we'll know whether we can make that survey happen this year.
Okay, thank you.
One more question. I've been duck hunting for maybe 50 years now, and weather conditions do, affect, how far south they go. I've been hunting the same area, and I've seen good, bad, in teal season and regular season, right there. Now, one thing I noticed this year after Hurricane Ida, we had a drought that occurred, and the ponds were just dry. It was just solid mud,
Right.
And so the ducks not having any feed, they're not gonna come this far south. And, as a department, I don't know if trying to get the ducks further south, if we can adapt some type of charge for hunters if they want to feed, we let industry feed them and come down south. Right now, it's illegal to feed, in Louisiana, but we feed with deer. And I'm not saying that that's the answer, but if we get industry, if big lodges or whatever, as long as they kill that limit and we patrol it, I don't know, we could add more duck hunters to the Louisiana. Because the duck hunters that's in Louisiana has declined because you can't kill anything, right there. I see the younger generation going and shoot more skeet than they do and going and spend money, go and get a license or shotgun shells or whatever, to go duck hunting. But it was just my food for thought, and we lost lots of marshland habitat over the years. It's just a big old combination of factors that has occurred across South Louisiana, right there. And with the farmers up north, just like Mr. McPherson had said, they flood their fields, leave them, cut their crops, and the ducks have no reason to come down south. The only reason they have when they flooded is if we got a good cold spell, snow or whatever, then they head south. So that's just my food for thought.
A positive I see, and you mentioned it kind of, is the NRCS with their WRP program is beginning to allow more soils, wetland, instead of saying everything has to be back in trees. And that's probably one of the more significant positives out there. And we sure ought to be talking with them as biologists and encouraging them to do that and explaining these things, not that they don't know it, but just make sure it's in their face and they have that attention.
Yeah, in my former job, I was engaged with NRCS and WRP for quite a while. And they have made some big improvements in those shallow water areas as well on our management areas. North of I-10 though, the biggest factor this year even with increased habitat on management areas and WRP was the lack of rain. You know, most of those don't have pumps on them.
This was the
So
driest-
without rain,
driest year
it's
I've
dry, yeah.
experienced in my life.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions, comments? All right, thank you so much. Appreciate the presentation. Mr. Adrian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Good morning. All right. I have a notice of intent for you regarding flounder. And we'll go through a little bit of a timeline, a little bit of a history and what we've done as far as bringing you management options in the past. So we first presented this flounder assessment to y'all in February of 2020 and indicated that stock was overfished and that we would be bringing some management options to y'all. We did that in February of 2021. At the time, there were some hurdles in what the commission could do as far as restricting the incidental take of flounder that comes out of shrimp gear. And at the time, you also asked us to run some different closed season scenarios. So we went back, we started running those other scenarios. And at the same time, the legislature, as part of the license restructure, changed 56-492 to allow the commission to regulate that incidental take of flounder out of shrimp trawl gear when the stock is overfished or undergoing overfishing. And so that brings us to today, where we have a notice of intent regarding a closed season for flounder for you. I'll go over some of the issues and concerns we've had with flounder. Those flounder declines continue to be a Gulf-wide and even Southeast Atlantic coast problem. We're seeing this all throughout the South. There's an issue. It's not overfishing. We're seeing recruitment issues, and that population keeps shrinking. There's speculation as to water temperatures and the sex determination of those flounders during those critical times when the larvae come inshore. There's also some mortality issues if that water temperature is too high when those larvae come in. And when we initially brought management options to you, we stressed the fact that what would be most effective if we focus on that time of year when those mature females are moving offshore, to allow more of those females to get offshore, hopefully spawn, and try to increase that spawning stock biomass. And just a note down there that we need to act in order to attempt to recover the stock within Louisiana waters. So this is a landings graphic. We updated this with the 2021 landings, and you can see, other than that spike in 2013, which has to do with that's the old NOAA MRIP program. There were one or two sites that had some bag limits of flounder from a couple of trips that potentially led to that spike. So it's a little bit of an anomaly, but you can see that declining trend in the landings in the last decade. And if you notice, you can't see any blue there in 2021 for the commercial landings. Those were the lowest we've seen at about 1,000 pounds. So this is a graphic from the management projections presentation that we presented in the past. You can see on the left side of that graphic, you can see that spawning potential ratio line as it's coming down there in the most recent decade and continues to decline. And we ran the projections off that most recent assessment point. And you can see, even if we had 100% reduction in the fishery, so a complete closure, that projection does not reach, at least out to 2030, does not reach that historical target of the fishery. So we have reduced the target we're looking to get to that 30% SPR. That's based on some acceptable science out there. And we figure that's something we can hopefully get to, and then we'll take it as it goes from there. But so we've already reduced, we've shifted the goalposts already, because we realize under the current recruitment conditions of the stock and the population size, these projections indicate we can't get to our target. And you can see there that blue line is the first one that gets to that 30% SPR, and that's that 50% reduction. So those scenarios we talked about, the previous ones, we had to account for that inability of y'all to regulate the incidental take in shrimp gear. And so it was a very confusing set of options that required a special fall season, in addition to some changes in size limits and bag limits. And if those of you that were here, if you recall, those tables were pretty confusing. So now, since we've had the legislative ability put in place for the commission to be able to adjust that shrimp incidental take, we have some new closed season options. They're less confusing. They would strictly be a closed season with no changes in bag and size limits. So these are some of those scenarios that you previously saw, and I apologize, it's small and hard to read, but we can focus on those highlighted ones. This would be, if you recall, there were two sets of scenarios: that special fall regulation, which you had to have in combination with some changes in bag and size limits. You couldn't do just one or the other and get to that 50% reduction because of that allowance of incidental take. So in the new scenarios we ran, you can see those two highlighted scenarios are an October 15th through November closure for both sectors, commercial and recreational. That gets us at that 50% reduction. And then that second one is an October 15th through December 15th, and that would be a 55% reduction. Here's that table that just illustrates how previously you had to combine these things with some very confusing regulations. We would have had to regulate that non-trawl based commercial fishery separate from those folks that are taking flounder in the shrimp trawl gear. And so it was very confusing and very restrictive, and the owners would have likely been exclusively on the recreational sector because of that inability to deal with that incidental take. And there, those two highlighted scenarios you can see are the previous two that are a closed season. And you can see there, they require no change the remainder of the year in the current size and bag limits. And currently there is no size limit, and it's a 10 fish bag limit. So recovery, we're attempting to recover that stock to that 30% SPR target or above. And that requires at least a 50% reduction in harvested mature female, not just all females, but mature female. And so we factored that into those projections as well. The best option to do that is to allow those females to get offshore and spawn. And the time to do that is in the fall. So you can see in our notice of intent, we're going to recommend that October 15th through November 30th closure to do that. With no change, the stock will not recover based on those current trends in recruitment and abundance. And as I mentioned earlier, even with a complete closure, we don't reach that historical target that you saw on that graphic. This is a recovery. I pulled this out of the management options document that y'all have. This shows you roughly when we project getting to that 30% SPR. Now, all this assumes regulations start this year, and they project from that recent stock assessment. And you can see we start getting to 30% somewhere around that 2026 to 2028 mark. So what are the, this came up in previous presentations, so I thought I would put it in here just to go over the other recreational limits in the other states. And in parentheses there, you will see when those most recent changes were made in those states. So you can see a lot of states have recognized this issue and made recent changes. I won't read those all individually, but we can certainly go back to them if you'd like to. But most states have at least a 14-inch minimum and some sort of closed season. These are the commercial limits in the other states, and you can see there as well. There have been some recent changes to those. And you can see most of those have a 14-inch minimum and then also some sort of closed season. So what is today's notice of intent? It modifies actually two sections of 76. There are two separate sections for flounder, one commercial, one recreational. As part of this, we're cleaning up some old outdated language that relates to the entanglement net ban back in 95 that phased in through 98. There was some old language relating to that. That's cleaned up in here, and we clarify some of the subsequent commercial possession and sale, excuse me, sale regulations that related to that. We add language clarifying within the commercial regulations that we now have that ability to regulate that incidental take. And it establishes a new closed season for both commercial and recreational for that October 15th through November 30th time period we discussed in both sectors. And the notice of intent provides the secretary all the authority to move that notice of intent all the way through final rule. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Ms. Adrian, did you, for the benefit of the new commissioners and all of us, did you, while I was out, did you go over the practical application of what's happening and what we were precluded from regulating?
Correct. We discussed it previously. You all didn't have the ability to regulate that incidental take and shrimp gear, and now you all do through
And it
new
was
legislation.
basically boats that were targeting flounder.
Yes, there's a small, and a lot of that harvest comes from a small subset of shrimp vessels that actively target flounder in that fall migration.
And they just sit in the passes with kind of butterfly nets. Is that what they were
They'll
using?
sit at choke points and harvest flounder, correct?
Okay. Any questions, comments? Commissioner, since,
I was just gonna, I'll make a motion.
yes, sir. Commissioner Sunseri moves that we adopt the notice of intent, seconded by Commissioner Reynolds. I'm sorry. Do we have any public? We do. No, we don't. Do we have any public comment? I didn't have any cards. Shame on them. They don't get a card. Certainly, Ms. Blanchard.
Mr. Ayers, with the head regulation with shrimp trawls in, big flounder, should just bypass for shrimping. Yeah.
Well, so a lot of this harvest comes from skimmer. Some of it is from otter trawls, but it's there's a lot of skimmer harvest as well. I'm not sure what those new regulations would do, but we're at a point where we do need to take action with the stock.
Well, yeah, I understand that, I just wanted to see because it should just correct itself with one regulation to the other, so I'm ready.
All right, all in favor on the adoption of the notice of intent, signify by saying aye. All right, the NOA is adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, the Bateman Haddon harvest.
Yes, sir.
Declaration of emergency.
I do not have a PowerPoint for this, but those of you that were here several years ago recall we have brought this to you in the past when the industry is asked to open a little early. This one would open that bait menhaden harvest season about 2 weeks early to allow some bait to get out there into commerce. It should not have any impact on the status of that stock, or biologically, we don't see an issue with it. So we would ask consideration to allow them to do that.
We don't have any opposition because of the biomass that would be taken out of the Gulf. You were sleeping, weren't you? I caught you, didn't I? It was a facetious question that doesn't need to be answered. We do have someone that would like to speak. Are there any questions or comments from the commissioners first? All right, Mr. Edgar.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, members of the commission. Thanks, Jason. For always, every year I have to come and ask for permission to go ahead and start a little early. Certainly, we've made an effort in the years past to keep Louisiana from running out of bait. Well, I promised Secretary Baum that I would do it. Well, this year I haven't managed to do that. This entire nation's basically out of bait. And bait prices are, 20, 30, some places 40 cents a pound more. A lot of people west of us are all using chicken. The Purina typically makes quite a bit of artificial bait. And since there's a lack of fish, the guys are doubling up and hoarding that. I'm pretty concerned about the next month or two as far as my particular boat. Thank you. Well, you hadn't said yes yet, but I would like to start a little early. A boatload of bait right now would help the state a whole lot. I had a good conversation with Commissioner Mike Strand several days ago. And what he did was, and I was asking for help. And he asked, what can he do to help? But he also asked, how did we get here? You know, what started this? Where were we 50 years ago? And I wrote a really nice letter to him explaining, how did we get here? And I would be glad to email that to all of you guys. So you could, I just did a summary of the last 50 years. I've been in business 35 years where we used to buy bait, who had bait, what started what, when did I start Louisiana bait, why? The whole thing's in a really nice summary. So, you know, if you guys want, I'll email it to each and every one of you, get a chance to look at it. But again, I would really like your consideration to let me start a little early. And I'm willing to answer any questions that any of you may have.
Any questions, comments? Let me ask a question while you're still here, and I don't know which one of you would be. Is there a reason you're coming here pretty often asking for this, if I remember? Is there a reason why, if there's no detriment to the resource and the speckled trout fishermen aren't going to get on to us for taking too many fish out of the biomass with this, then is there a reason why we don't just open it on an annual basis early?
I can take that, Mr. Chairman. It's in legislation that season, and we're attempting to get that. I know Cole has been attempting to get that as part of our package at some point to adjust that.
So the season is set in legislation, but we have the ability by declaration of emergency to change it.
Correct.
Good answer. All right. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here this morning.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Okay, do I hear a motion to adopt the declaration of emergency? Commissioner DeQueer, seconded by Commissioner Segarra. All those in favor signify by saying aye. The declaration of emergency is adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, receive an update on the Louisiana estuarine inventory project. Mr. Fisher.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Andy Fisher, and I am the Director of the Fisheries Research and Assessment Section. And as soon as my presentation loads, I'll get started. Okay, just to give you a little bit of background, in 2017, the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries Commission requested an updated version of the Louisiana Gulf of Mexico estuarine inventory and study, and it's referred to as the GMEI. The initial GMEI, often referred to as the Red Book due to its red cover, was published by the Wildlife and Fisheries Commission in 1971. It was conceived by the Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission and the U.S. Department of Interior, Bureau of Commercial Fisheries in 1966, with inventories published for Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. In September of 2018, LWF was awarded approximately $150,000 through the NOAA SK grant competition to develop an updated version of the GMEI, which was titled the Louisiana Coastal Inventory and Study, which I will now refer to as the LCIS. This updated inventory would focus on existing data collected by LWF in 2018, the most current complete year of verified data at the time of commencement of this project. So as an update, on December 21st, 2021, a 705-page draft document of the LCIS was presented to the Fisheries Assistant Secretary and the Fisheries Administrator, and that document is currently in review. So I want to give you a little bit of a comparison of the 1971 GMI with the LCIS. In 1971, they sampled 108 sampling stations. They used 2 sampling gears, that being the 16-foot trawl and the 100-foot seine, and they also collected corresponding environmental and hydrological data. That was in effect the genesis of our fisheries independent sampling program, which we now conduct, and it has expanded significantly over the years. Now we have a number of programs in our independent sampling, being finfish, oyster, mollusk, shrimp, and we now our fisheries independent sampling consists of 414 sampling stations. We now use 6 sampling gears. Those consist of the 16-foot trawl, the 50-foot seine, the 750-foot trammel net, the gill net, the meter square oyster sampler, and the 24-inch oyster dredge. Additionally, we also collect corresponding environmental hydrological data with every sample we take. So, as I mentioned, it's a very large document. I'm not going to go through all of the contents of the document, but I wanted just to point out some of the major components. We have an introduction section, which starts with a project overview, and then we have a description of the LCIS study areas, and that is a description of not only all of our coastal basins, but also our coastal study areas. And then we have section 1, which is our fisheries and invertebrates collected with various gear types in the Louisiana estuaries. In this study, in this section, we have descriptions of all of the associated monitoring programs that we accessed for this study and those databases. And we also describe our methodologies in terms of samplings, field and laboratory protocols. And then we also have individual systematic accounts, and those are accounts of each specific species sampled in 2018. And we wrote up basically an account of where that species occurred throughout the state, what conditions environmentally, the salinity, temperature, dissolved oxygen, and turbidity in which they were encountered, as well as size ranges for each species. Then we also include data tables. The data tables follow the structure and content of the original GMI, specifically the 4 main data tables included in that original document. Additionally, we also have some more tables to provide as complete an inventory of 2018 as possible. The 2018 LCIS actually contains every bit of fisheries independent data and corresponding environmental data that we collected for that year. And I'm going to show you an example on the next slide of one of those tables. But we do also have a discussion section where we compare our results from the data from the 2018 inventory with that of the 1971 inventory. So I apologize for the way this looks. I know you're not going to be able to read the actual data points, and that's not so important at this point. I just wanted to include this to show you the structure and how we report this data. It's a tremendous amount of data. This table is Table 8 in the new LCIS. It demonstrates seasonal variation in total catch and CPU by basin, project, and gear type with salinity, dissolved oxygen, temperature, and turbidity. I will note that in the original 1971 inventory, this table was 15 pages. With the amount of data we collected in 2018, this table is now 175 pages and has over 80,000 data points. But I wanted to show you how we broke it out so it's easier for those that want to reference this inventory, whether that be academics or managers. We tried to lay it out so that the data would be easy for them to access, and the corresponding environmental data and gear types that they use would be easy to find. So what we did was, I got my laser pointer on. Let's see here. Well, unfortunately, my laser pointer isn't working very well, but up at the top, what you see is we broke it out by basin. So at the top, that is for Barataria Basin. And then we look into, for we break it up then by project, whether that be finfish, shrimp, whatever type of sampling project we're the data that comes from. And then we separate it out by gear. This is the 16-foot trawl gear. And if you look at that top line, we have seasonality. So we have all the months of the year. And then all those columns at the top are the corresponding environmental parameters right here. You have salinity, temperature, dissolved oxygen, and turbidity. And then what we do after we include all of this corresponding environmental data associated with this gear type, we then go down and we report all of the vertebrate samples that we collected in alphabetical order. And that is in total catch. What I don't include in this page, but followed by that is then the CPUE values for those specific vertebrates. Then we also break it down by invertebrates. So we list total catch for invertebrates and CPU for invertebrates as well. We break that down by those 6 gear types I mentioned, and then we also break it down by basin. Followed by that, section 2 is an analysis and treatment of zooplankton of estuarine waters of Louisiana using Southeast Area Monitoring Assessment Program data, or CMAP data. And this section includes a description of sampling methods, field and laboratory protocols used in the CMAP program. We examine species, temperature, salinity, and relative abundance by statistical zone, as well as seasonal distribution of the top 20 most abundant zooplankton species with special reference to temperature and salinities. So before I conclude, I just wanted to give you an example of just some of the general comparisons you can pull from this inventory. As I said, it's a tremendous amount of data, but I wanted to show you some of the things that we compare within the original document from 1971. In 2018, the maximum CPU for spotted sea trout sampled with a 16-foot trawl in Barataria Bay was 1.2, compared with a CPU of 20 in 1971. The maximum CPUE for southern flounder sampled in Barataria Bay with that same gear in 2018 was 0.1, compared with a CPUE of 2.0 in 1971. When looking at white shrimp, the maximum CPU sampled with a 16-foot trawl in Pontchartrain Basin in 2018 was 214.1, compared with a lower CPUE of 124 in 1971. So we hope this kind of data will be more of a reference, a useful document for academics, managers, and researchers that are looking for that kind of information. We look at it as a representation of all the work, all the data that we collect throughout the year in our fisheries independent programs. So with that, I can take any questions.
All right. Commissioner Sinceri?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. I appreciate all the work you've done on this, and
Sure.
the rest of the people working with you to gather all of this data. It's very impressive.
Thank you.
And when this directive was given, we had asked that it replicate the study, and to be able to use it as a transparency kind of to put over the top and to see how things have changed. Understand with like a couple of things at the end where you showed the differences of what those findings were in 71 compared to 2018. And those are the kind of things that, as well as like the depths of the water bodies, the size and how they have changed, and those salinity changes and things like that, that have affected those negative results we saw. And I mean, I think we all kind of knew that kind of stuff was occurring, but to put it in a document form, to be able to show and to use as a guide for policy and for y'all to help us do things based on what has occurred and where we go from there, how we have to move to be able to do the best to regulate and try to improve like what we're supposed to do. Is there going, I'm coming to the question, is there going to be some kind of way that we'll be able to look at that and make those comparisons with this document to compare 71 to 18?
Well, I think it depends on the kind of comparison. I think you have to look at the limitations of the data. We're looking at a point in time in 1971 to 2018. So it's very difficult to make an inference or about what changes have occurred based on those two data points. Oftentimes when you're looking into those, looking for those reasons, you look at time series data, kind of like when you're looking at a stock assessment or something. So we are definitely we discuss some of that in the discussion section, but you know, and we can look at some salinities, you know, we can map some salinities and stuff, but I feel like you have to be careful in making those comparisons because of it's comparing essentially 1 year, 50 years ago from today, if you know what I'm saying. So you don't have that time series of data to show those patterns over time.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly, but to look at, say, like, just do a map of Louisiana and put it over the top, and you can look at land masses.
Oh, sure, we
and
can.
And see those land masses and see how the hydrology has changed.
We can
because
definitely,
of that.
we can definitely include, especially in the project, study area descriptions, changes over time, you know, the changes that have occurred over time that other agencies have looked at, because LDWF in general, we don't, that's not our mission. We focus mainly on the biology. So we don't have a lot of that information. So we can certainly reach out and look for that information to include in that section to explain the changes in the actual ecosystem, which may have led to the changes we see in the data.
Right, and that's the thing. It's like looking at the way things are, the salinities have moved north compared to what they might have been in 71.
Sure.
And how that has impacted things like flounder, why we don't see that biomass and the spawning capabilities and habitat that they might need. And what we have to do to try to get that back.
Right.
How do we manage it? And those are the goals. And I want to tell you, thank you very much. I thank the department for putting this together, and hopefully that will be the goal, and that we're able to look at this and do those. I understand what you're saying, but my thought process is a little more simplistic, I guess, in that it would help us as well as future commissioners and future biologists and managers within the department to determine what the needs are to be able to make to impose regulations, or even it requests that the state do something to help habitat improvement in certain areas and things like that, so that we'll be able to produce more wildlife and fisheries for the citizens of the state of Louisiana. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Garrett, resolution to expand the reciprocal agreement with Texas on adjacent waters.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not a charter fisherman, but I do own a cowboy hat, so hopefully I have the qualifications necessary to present this. As you're aware, the legislature passed Act 356 last year, which was the comprehensive license overhaul. And as part of that, we established a new freshwater fishing guide license. Louisiana had never had one before. Now we do. With that came the prerequisites that are the same for saltwater charter captains, which is you need to have a U.S. Coast Guard captain's license, proof of liability insurance, and a valid recreational fishing license. Our neighbors to our west, Texas, has long had a freshwater fishing guide license. However, they do not have any of the ancillary requirements that I just mentioned. They just have a license, they sell it. It's the same for residents and non-residents. Many Louisiana charter captains who have been fishing in Caddo Lake, Toledo Bend, or the Sabine River on the Texas side have been buying that license for a long time. Obviously, we share waters with the state of Texas. We have had a long history of working with the state of Texas to reach uniform regulations concerning freshwater fishing. And also we have currently for recreational fishing, a reciprocal agreement, whereas their residents from their state holding a license issued in that home state can fish in Louisiana waters bordering Texas and vice versa. So recognizing that and recognizing that we want to make sure that we have a level playing field, that one state doesn't get an advantage by having less restrictions or you know, a different license structure. We've reached out to the state of Texas to see if we can't expand this existing reciprocal agreement and apply it to these freshwater guides. They have been very receptive. In fact, I'm happy to say that their commission meets on the 23rd of this month. They will be considering a notice of intent to have the requirement for the Coast Guard captain's license as part of their license for freshwater guides on those waters that border Texas and Louisiana. So we are taking steps to make sure that these regulations are compatible and equitable for that matter. So we believe this is a good thing. It would prevent our citizens from having to go buy Texas licenses to fish all of Toledo Bend, all of Caddo, and vice versa. So you know, with that, I would request what this resolution does, I guess I should say, is authorizes the chairman and the secretary to continue working with the state of Texas to execute a reciprocal agreement once we are satisfied that the concerns of our citizens have been met and we've got an equitable agreement in place. So that is the request. That's what the resolution does, and I would request your favorable passage. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Comments? All right. Commissioner Blanchard moves that we adopt the resolution. Seconded by Commissioner Hogan. All those in favor signify. Oh, I apologize, Mr. Fisher. We're gonna let you double dip today. First presentation was excellent. Thank you.
I'll be brief. Just wanted to come up and say that our freshwater guides in the northern part of the state support this resolution. And I wanted to especially thank Cole and Patrick for taking the lead and getting with the state of Texas and really making sure that we're all on the same page and getting this stuff done. So thank you all very much, and we support it.
Thank you. We appreciate your input and your group support for it. All of those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, the resolution is adopted. In the future, Ms. Susan, if you remind me, we're going to announce prior to the meeting that anyone wishing to speak needs to fill out a card. They can do it anytime during the meeting by bringing it to you, and we'll capture all the information since I'm not getting them to state their address at the podium, and I don't want to create any hardships for you. All right, that was our last agenda item other than receiving public comment. Do we have any public comment? All right, with that, Commissioner Blanchard moved that we adjourn, unanimously seconded. Thank you.